He stood still. One dog, one decision, and an entire plane was stopped. No one knew why a German Shepherd named Ranger refused to move. Not the pilot, not the passengers, not even his handler. But what they discovered hidden deep inside that cargo hold, it shook the nation. Behind the silent stare of a loyal canine was a truth no machine could detect. What happened next will restore your faith in instinct, in loyalty, and in heroes with four legs. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far Ranger's story travels. And if you believe that courage has no species, that dogs can save lives in ways we can't imagine, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will never leave your heart. A thin sheet of frost clung to the tarmac as dawn broke over Denver International Airport. The sky was a blend of pale peach and cold blue, casting long shadows across hangars and terminal gates. Wind rolled across the open spaces, whistling softly between stacked cargo containers and the steel ribs of cargo bay doors. It was supposed to be a routine morning, but nothing about this morning would be routine, not for Ranger and certainly not for Mark Harris. Mark stood just outside Cargo Bay 47, adjusting the collar of his DHS jacket. His temples pulsed, the same dull throb that had plagued him ever since the blast outside Kandahar 3 years ago. The VA doctors had called it residual neurological inflammation. Mark called it a time bomb in his skull. Some days it was just an ache. Other days, like this one, it made everything feel sharp-edged and loud. He squeezed his eyes shut, took a breath, and exhaled through his nose. Beside him, Ranger was already in working mode. The 5-year-old German Shepherd paced ahead with smooth precision, his black and tan coat sleek and well-kept despite the bite of winter air. His gait was controlled, tail steady behind him. But Mark saw it, the tension in his frame. Ranger was alert, too alert. They moved along the loading zone at a slow patrol pace. Cargo handlers bustled in and out of bay doors, stacking crates, scanning barcodes, waving clipboards. One of them, a young guy with earbuds, gave Ranger a wide berth. "Morning, officer," he called to Mark with a nod, then vanished through a rolling gate. Mark gave a tight-lipped reply. His headache was worsening, and noise grated like sandpaper behind his eyes. They rounded the corner to the east loading section of Terminal C, where crates for Flight 217 to JFK were being staged. 20 minutes remained until loading began. Everything seemed normal. The manifests were already scanned and stacked. The security scans had cleared. The metal pallet jacks buzzed low as workers moved between lanes. And then Ranger stopped. Mark felt the leash go taut. Ranger's body went still, eyes locked forward. He lowered his head and growled, not a loud, theatrical sound, but low and steady, like a motor idling beneath his ribs. His hackles barely rose, but his meaning was unmistakable. Something was wrong. Mark narrowed his eyes and followed Ranger's stare. "What do you see?" he murmured. The dog's gaze was locked on a large, unassuming cargo container near the center of the bay. It was labeled medical equipment, urgent shipment, stenciled in red. It had passed customs. It had the right stamps. It looked like every other crate, but Ranger didn't care about that. He inched forward, nose working the air, and gave another quiet growl. Mark crouched down, placing a hand gently on the dog's shoulder. "Is that it?" he whispered. Ranger didn't sit, didn't bark, but he didn't back down either. It was strange behavior. Usually a trained alert from Ranger came with a clear signal, sitting, staring, tail down, but here the dog was caught between instincts and protocol, like he didn't quite know what he was smelling, only that it was wrong. Mark straightened and keyed his shoulder radio. "Unit 4, I've got a canine reacting oddly in Bay 47. No formal alert, but he's fixated. Requesting a second check on cargo, marked Flight 21 scene." The dispatcher responded with static. Then, "Copy Unit 4. Logging a soft flag for secondary review." Ranger moved forward slightly and began to circle the crate, sniffing the floor, then backpedaling as if the scent was too strong or foreign. Mark watched him closely. It wasn't drugs, wasn't accelerant. He'd seen Ranger react to both, and this wasn't that. It was deeper, something layered. Okay, buddy," Mark muttered. "Let's just slow down." His head throbbed again, sharp now, like a spike twisting behind his eyes. He took a breath through his teeth and closed his left eye, trying to dull the light. Ranger sat down, finally, but not in a relaxed way. His ears stayed forward. His chest was tight. Mark dropped to one knee beside him. "I know. I trust you. I do." In that moment, a young woman passed behind them, pushing a dolly of secured cases. "Everything all right with your dog?" she asked, glancing nervously at Ranger's stiff posture. Mark gave her a tired smile. "Just being thorough." She nodded and moved on, and the bay returned to motion. But Ranger didn't. He was still watching the crate, our eyes narrowed, muscles like cables. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, the headache pulsing, his vision slightly blurred on the edges. He wanted to be wrong, wanted this to be nothing, just another twitch of a dog on edge. But Mark had learned to listen to silence in dogs the way soldiers learn to listen to the wind. Ranger had a reason, and Mark, despite the migraine, despite the rules, despite the chaos always waiting behind each protocol, would back him every time. He clicked his radio again. "Unit 4 again. I'm requesting manual inspection. Something's not right here." "Stand by," came the answer. Mark sat on the crate next to Ranger. He gently touched the brass name tag on the dog's collar. Ranger. The name still gave him a lump in his throat some mornings. Major had died in his arms on a vet table in Texas 2 years ago, and Mark hadn't spoken to another dog since. He swore he wouldn't. And then came this stubborn, underfed pup in a Wyoming shelter who snapped at his leash but cried in his sleep. A dog with too much pain and too much fight in his bones. He wasn't supposed to pass the TSA behavioral eval. He wasn't supposed to pass anything. But Mark had seen that fire. He named him Ranger because sometimes the only way forward is through, and sometimes the only ones who understand broken things are the ones already broken. Ranger leaned against Mark's leg now, still watching, still waiting. That's when Mark knew. It wasn't just a hunch. His partner was telling him something real, and the day was about to stop being routine. The first boarding call for Flight 217 rang out through Terminal C like the distant chime of a warning bell. Passengers stirred from their seats, snapped laptop lids closed, gathered bags, and formed lines in the gentle chaos of routine travel. Among them moved Claire Bennett, weaving through the terminal with practiced focus, a leather satchel slung over her shoulder and a file folder pressed tight against her chest. Claire was 32, tall and sharply built, with freckled skin that hinted at long hours under sun, and a mop of dark auburn curls tied back in a quick twist. Her eyes, clear gray and constantly scanning, had the weight of someone who had seen more truth than most people wanted to know. A former regional crime reporter for the Chicago Herald, she'd built a reputation on stories that cut too close to the powerful. After publishing a piece that exposed a major pharmaceutical bribery ring, Claire was blacklisted from 3 major outlets and quietly reassigned. She didn't mind. It was proof she was asking the right questions. Now a freelance investigative journalist, she was chasing a lead that had grown teeth. For the past 4 months, Claire had followed a series of missing persons reports. Scientists, logistics managers, low-profile engineers, all with ties to a tech conglomerate named Aeon Core. At first, the connections seemed coincidental, but patterns had started to form. Strange flight reassignments, sudden resignations, and then silence. What gnawed at her was the consistency. Every person she'd traced had either passed through or worked around flights originating from Denver. Flight 217 had come up twice. Today she wasn't chasing data. She was stepping into the pattern itself. She handed her boarding pass to the gate attendant, offered a polite smile, and proceeded down the jet bridge, her mind already arranging facts into timelines. The air was dry, sterile, heavy with recirculated oxygen. She clutched her satchel tighter, the edge of her manila folder biting into her palm. Somewhere in the cargo hold below her, she believed, was the piece she needed. The flight manifest had flagged an equipment crate, registered under a shell company she'd traced to Aeon Core's Denver warehouse. She didn't have access to it, not yet. But she had a seat. And a suspicion. Meanwhile, on the tarmac, Captain Daniel Ross stood beneath the forward landing gear, clipboard in hand, performing his pre-flight checks with steady precision. At 57, Daniel had the calm gravitas of a man who had spent most of his life in the sky. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and though he wore his uniform with clean formality, there was a worn elegance in the way he moved. He had flown everything from cargo freighters in Alaska to first-class international routes. But these days, he stuck to cross-country flights and tried to keep his head low. Daniel had always believed in systems, in protocols, but something about today itched. Maybe it was the mild turbulence alert forecast over Ohio, or maybe it was just the vague tension in the air. The crew was efficient, the co-pilot a capable young woman named Jenna, with an eye for numbers and a quiet, steady nature. But Daniel had flown long enough to know when something felt off. Cabin pressurization checked, fuel confirmed, Jenna's voice echoed from the flight deck. Copy that, Daniel murmured. He turned, ready to climb aboard when his radio crackled. This is Ground Team Bravo. Captain Ross, we've got a situation. There's a K-9 unit on the runway, blocking the path of cargo loadout vehicle. Daniel blinked. Did you say a dog? Affirmative, sir. The Shepherd's in the direct line of the cargo tow for your aircraft. He's not moving. What unit? K-9 Unit 4, Ranger, belongs to DHS. Daniel frowned. Is this a drill? Negative, sir. The handler's not calling him off. It's intentional. Daniel closed his eyes for a beat. Tell them this flight is grounded until that animal moves. From her window seat in 14A, Claire had just buckled in and was reviewing the notes in her folder when the intercom crackled overhead. A calm voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're experiencing a brief delay due to a ground logistics issue. We appreciate your patience. Her brow furrowed. She glanced out the small window, and through the gap in the terminal buildings, she spotted movement on the tarmac. Figures gathered near the nose of the plane, and there, unmistakably, a dog standing firm in front of a loading truck. Her pulse quickened. Come on, Ranger, Mark Harris muttered under his breath, standing several feet behind his partner. Ranger stood like a statue, body tense, ears forward, eyes locked on the cargo being prepared for loading. He hadn't barked. He hadn't moved. The cargo crew, increasingly agitated, paced in tight circles. A manager with a clipboard approached Mark. Sir, we're behind schedule. You need to clear your dog. Now. Mark didn't blink. We're not going anywhere until someone checks that crate. Crate's been cleared already. Not by him, Mark gestured to Ranger, and he hasn't been wrong yet. In the terminal tower, Director Evelyn Cross watched from the observation window, arms folded, her jaw clenched. She had just arrived moments earlier after receiving a security flag from Sergeant Moore. Tall and lean in a charcoal blazer, Evelyn had the presence of someone who had spent her entire career balancing politics and risk. She wasn't quick to panic, but neither did she dismiss instinct. Get me visuals on that crate, she ordered. Her assistant, a slim, freckled young man named Todd, nodded and moved quickly. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. Ranger had frozen in front of a specific point. Not the crate they thought, the one adjacent, the one not logged. Claire, unaware of the growing storm around her, reopened her laptop and typed one phrase into her notes file. Crate not on manifest, watch DHS channel. Down below, Mark stepped closer to Ranger. Easy, boy, he said, voice low. You're doing good. Just hold. Ranger didn't flinch. Cargo crew, pilots, airport security, and one investigative journalist unaware she was being circled by the truth. All of them now waited on the judgment of a single dog. And still, Ranger didn't move. The air around the forest clearing stood still, as if nature itself were watching. Lila knelt slowly, the moss damp beneath her jeans. Her eyes remained fixed on the mother German shepherd, Captain, whose breath came in slow, shallow waves. Blood had soaked into the earth around her paw, where the rusted trap bit deep into bone and tendon. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her amber eyes never left Lila's. They were steady, unwavering, full of something ancient and sorrowful. Lila bit her lip hard to stop it from quivering. She didn't know what to do, but doing nothing felt worse. I'm going to help, she whispered. Her voice shook. She took off her jacket, laid it on the moss, and crawled forward. The puppy, small, black and tan like a curled-up shadow, let out a soft squeak when Lila gently reached toward it. Captain flinched, but didn't snarl. Her body tensed as Lila carefully picked up the pup, its round belly rising and falling in a sleepy rhythm. Lila held the puppy close to her chest, one hand beneath its fragile body. It nuzzled instinctively at her sweater, eyes still shut to the world. You're okay, she murmured. I've got you. Then Lila turned to the trap. Her stomach churned as she examined it. Jagged metal springs locked tight, rusty with age. She recognized the mechanism from pictures in one of Grandpa Tom's wildlife books. This wasn't a modern restraint. This was a relic, illegal and cruel. She placed the puppy back inside her jacket, snug against her chest, and set her hands on the trap's spring-loaded sides. It was cold, unyielding. She took a breath and pushed. Nothing. She braced her knee against a root and pushed again, harder. The metal creaked slightly. Captain whimpered, a soft, agonized sound that made Lila's arms shake. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm trying. I'm trying." One more push. Her hand slipped, and she fell backward into the moss, her palms burning. Captain lifted her head, barely, and looked at her, not with blame, but with something deeper. Acceptance. It was then that Lila understood. This wasn't just about pain or freedom. This was about trust. About the decision Captain had made when she hadn't growled, when she hadn't moved, when she let Lila take the pup. That moment had been her choice. She was asking for help, and she was giving everything to save her baby. Lila nodded through her tears. "I'll get help, I swear." She wrapped the jacket tighter around the puppy, turned and ran, branches whipping against her face, twigs snapping beneath her boots. She didn't stop to breathe. Her feet barely touched the forest floor. Her lungs burned, but she didn't slow down. The puppy whimpered softly, but Lila clutched him tighter and whispered over and over, "It's okay. It's okay. We're going to save her. We're going to save her." Across town, in the community room of the American Legion Hall, Maggie Cole leaned over a table covered in notes, newspaper clippings, and 2 faded military files. She wasn't alone. Beside her sat Stanley Greer, a retired Army logistician in his late 60s with a soft gut, a stiff neck, and a brain like a filing cabinet. His glasses rested low on his nose, and he spoke with the careful cadence of a man used to being asked things others forgot. "Here," he said, tapping a file, "K-9 Sergeant Hope, Afghanistan, 2009 through 2012. She served under Lieutenant Andrew Salter, 3 tours, never wounded until the 3rd deployment. Took shrapnel to the shoulder during an ambush in Kandahar. Saved the whole squad." Maggie's brow furrowed. "That's the same injury listed in the retirement notes." Stanley nodded. "Right shoulder never healed right. Couldn't return to active duty. Salter adopted her after discharge. I remember because she was the last dog out of that unit still alive." "And then went missing," Maggie added, flipping the page. "No press, no medal, just vanished." He sighed. "It happens. These dogs don't always get the thanks they deserve." Maggie looked at the grainy photo of Captain, back when she was still called Hope, upright, proud, sitting between a row of soldiers. One hand rested on her back. Salter's, probably. "She saved 5 men that day," she whispered, "and no one talks about it." Maggie's eyes narrowed. "Well, I will." By the time Lila burst through the tree line behind Grandpa Tom's cabin, the sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the porch and the dry garden beds. Her cheeks were scratched, her hair wild, and tears streaked the dirt on her face. She stumbled toward the workshop, where Tom was fixing the hinge on an old barn door. "Grandpa!" she screamed. Tom turned fast. When he saw her, and the way she cradled the bundle in her arms, he dropped his tools and met her halfway. "She's hurt," Lila gasped. "She's stuck in a trap. It's metal, and it's old, and it's digging into her, and there's blood, and she gave me her puppy, and I couldn't open it. I couldn't—" Tom knelt and gently pulled open the edge of the jacket. The puppy, barely a week old, whimpered softly. His ribs showed faintly beneath his fur, but he was alive. "Easy," Tom said, voice calm but serious. "You're okay. He's okay. Let's get inside." "No, we can't. She's still there. She's going to die if we don't. Grandpa, we have to go back." Tom looked into her eyes. What he saw there wasn't a child's panic. It was something else. The weight of responsibility, of having been trusted with a life. He stood. "Okay, let's go get her." The metal crate sat like a forgotten monolith in the center of Hangar B3. The wide, echoing space had been cleared out minutes after Evelyn Cross issued the order. Now it was ringed by yellow hazard tape and a temporary containment perimeter. A forensics team from DHS, suited in gray coveralls and lead-threaded gloves, moved carefully around the crate, prepping it for inspection. An electromagnetic interference blanket was already draped over the far side. Cameras had been disabled. The bay was now a controlled silence, cold, clinical, and quietly dangerous. Evelyn stood off to the side, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes scanned every detail. She had dealt with threats before, false bomb alerts, chemical leaks, even a suspicious diplomat once. But this felt different. This wasn't chaos. This was precision, stealth. It unsettled her more than she'd like to admit. Mark stood nearby, his hands still gloved, arms tense. Ranger sat beside him, calmer now, but still focused, ears pivoting at the slightest sound from the crate. The tension in his frame hadn't released. His instincts were still lit like a fuse. The technician leading the investigation was a man in his early 40s named Diego Salazar. Short and stocky, with sharp brown eyes behind rimless safety goggles, he spoke in clipped, low tones. Diego had worked with Homeland Security for 13 years, specializing in field signal interception and non-standard electronic devices. He trusted tech, not guesswork, but even he was careful now. "We're going in," he announced, marking timestamp, cutting seal. 2 agents moved in and used bolt snips on the rear clasps. The lid released with a faint hiss of pressure. The smell of sterilized plastic and adhesive immediately filled the air. Inside, neatly packed in foam, were 5 silver cylinders, uniform, sealed, and labeled with serial numbers. A clean set of papers was affixed to the top of the foam insert. "Medical diagnostic modules," one of the agents read aloud. "According to this, destination, Mount Sinai Hospital, New York." "Scan 1, Diego instructed. The scanner passed over the first cylinder. Nothing. The second, still nothing. It was the third that triggered a warning beep. Diego stepped in, adjusted the frequency, and the device let out a slow, high-pitched chirp. "Found it," he muttered. "There's a signal source embedded inside the casing. Passive frequency, intermittent. Likely designed to mimic residual machine output from medical equipment." "Transmitting or receiving?" Evelyn asked sharply. "Both. Short-range burst, low-level encryption." Diego's brow furrowed. "It's not a tracker. It's a repeater." "A repeater for what?" Mark asked. Diego didn't answer right away. He tapped his stylus to the module, then turned to his team. "I want this routed through the van now. We're analyzing on full-band spectrum sweep." Evelyn motioned to her assistant Todd, who had just arrived with a digital tablet in hand. Tall and lanky with anxious energy, Todd had a background in cybersecurity, but never seemed comfortable in the field. His dark blue hoodie peeked out under his airport clearance vest, and his messy brown hair was half covered by a crooked DHS cap. "Check incoming and outgoing signal data for all frequencies from 0600 onward," she told him. "If anything was sent or received before we got it locked down, I want to know where it went." Todd nodded and scurried off to set up the uplink. Mark leaned against the metal scaffolding, rubbing the back of his neck. "Medical crate, my ass." Ranger, still watching the crate, let out a soft, uncertain whine. "Yeah, I know, boy," Mark murmured. "You knew before all of us." Meanwhile, aboard the still-grounded Flight 217, Claire Bennett remained in seat 14A, her laptop dark, but her phone gripped tightly in her palm. The plane hadn't been cleared for takeoff yet, and the passengers had been told there was a technical delay, but Claire had eyes and a telephoto lens. During the scramble on the tarmac, she had managed to lean just far enough over her tray table to catch several shots through the window. Cargo handlers moving crates, the large silver container with no label. One frame in particular had captured something she hadn't expected, a faint imprint on the corner of the inner packaging. Barely visible, nearly rubbed off, but unmistakable. A circle with a jagged diagonal line running through it, the faded logo of Aeon Core Technologies. Claire's chest tightened. Aeon Core had no publicly known connection to medical diagnostics. In fact, they specialized in advanced surveillance systems and military-grade sensors. Claire had been following them for months through whistleblowers and leaked documents, none of which made sense until now. She thumbed her camera roll back and zoomed in. The logo was real. She took a breath, opened her encrypted chat, and typed, "Subject confirmed, Aeon Core logo on hidden cargo, Pics attached, DHS involved, contact me ASAP. Then she pressed send. Claire's mind raced. She thought about all the missing engineers, the sudden resignations, the trails that always seemed to vanish at airports. They weren't just developing tech, they were moving it, quietly, illegally, disguised as something harmless. And somehow, one dog, just one, had smelled the truth. Back in the hangar, Evelyn stood watching the forensics team seal the crate once more. Keep the contents under chain of custody, she said, and alert the FAA and intelligence operations. We may be looking at a breach of transport security policy. I want to know who approved this load and why it was passed through secondary inspection with no digital trail. Mark, still beside Ranger, muttered, because someone knew it wouldn't be checked. Not by scanners, anyway.
Evelyn's eyes met his. But it was, she said quietly. Just not by a machine.
Ranger finally relaxed his shoulders slightly, letting out a long breath through his nose, as if signaling that, for now, his job was done. The sky above Denver had turned a milky silver by late morning, casting a sterile glow across the airport's security annex. Outside, the runway buzz had resumed in distant pockets, but within the inner corridors of Homeland Security's Temporary Operations Unit, a strange silence persisted, the kind that always followed after something real had been uncovered, when everyone realized the rules weren't working the way they were supposed to. Claire Bennett stood in a debriefing room near Hangar B3, her arms crossed, laptop bag hanging from her shoulder. Across from her sat Mark Harris, still in his uniform, hands on his thighs, back straight, but eyes a little tired. Ranger lay at his feet, finally at rest, his chin on his paws, but his ears still twitching now and then, as if the scent of tension lingered in the air. Claire had requested the meeting, insisted, really. Evelyn Cross had reluctantly approved it under media containment cooperation, with the understanding that nothing Claire learned would be published until DHS cleared it. Claire had nodded, but that didn't mean she wasn't writing everything down in her mind. I've been following Aeon Corps for almost 6 months, she began, voice low, even. They specialize in signal manipulation, adaptive stealth tech, stuff meant for battlefield surveillance, but nothing they officially sell domestically. A few months ago, engineers and logistics techs started disappearing, not all at once. One here, one there. The only connection between them, they had all either worked at or had been assigned near Aeon Corps' shipment divisions, mostly near airports. Mark said nothing at first. Then, you think they're using airports to move surveillance gear? Claire nodded. I think they've already been doing it. That crate this morning wasn't an outlier. It was part of a network. And DHS almost missed it until your dog stepped in. Mark glanced down at Ranger, who gave no response except the slow rise and fall of his rib cage. He doesn't miss much, Mark murmured. Claire reached into her bag, pulling out a printed page with a blurry but discernible logo. I saw this on the interior foam of that crate. Aeon Corps' mark. Faint, almost like they tried to sand it off. Mark took the paper, looked at it briefly, then passed it back. They're not even trying that hard anymore. Claire studied him for a moment. How did you know to trust the dog? Mark looked away, rubbed the back of his neck. Sometimes, instinct is all that's left when protocol fails. Just then, Evelyn entered the room, her jaw set, holding a tablet in one hand. Claire, she said, this interview ends now. You've had your window. DHS will follow up with a controlled briefing if necessary. Claire raised a brow. You should want people to know. I want to protect civilians, Evelyn snapped. You want a story. The tension between them simmered, but Mark stood before it could boil over. Let her walk me out, he said quietly. Evelyn hesitated. 2 minutes. Outside the annex, as they walked toward the parking area, Claire leaned slightly toward Mark. There's something else. I traced 3 previous cargo manifests tied to Aeon Corps. 2 left from here, 1 from Phoenix. All had minor technical delays en route. Each had medical declarations. Mark stopped walking. Do you still have the codes? I memorized them, she said, pulling out a small notebook and jotting quickly. I think they're rerouting the crates through unscanned zones using partner carriers. Mark took the paper without speaking. Elsewhere in the terminal, Captain Daniel Ross sat in a crew lounge with a blank report form glowing on his tablet. His coffee had gone cold. His uniform jacket was folded neatly on the chair beside him. He stared at the blinking cursor next to Incident Summary. Flight 217. Daniel was a man built for flight, calm, principled, measured. But something about the morning's events clung to him like mist. A dog grounding a flight was one thing, but the secrecy, the scramble, the lack of information afterward, it scraped against his professional instincts. He scrolled through his archived logs from the past 3 months. Nothing unusual on the surface. But then something caught his eye. 3 shipments on 3 different flights, all to JFK, all marked as expedited medical cargo, all originating from different supply firms, but each traced back to a central distribution hub, Aon Logistics Group, a name that hadn't raised red flags before, but now it felt like a thread. Daniel tapped to expand the crate codes. All 3 shared identical dimensions, identical weight, identical medical response tracking numbers, all just 1 digit apart. It wasn't a pattern by accident. He took a breath, then opened a secured pilot communications app. He typed, requesting ground trace on cargo ID AEL 2179, recent flight manifest, possible inconsistencies. He paused, then added, urgent, discretion requested. Back in the main terminal, a more immediate concern had emerged. Daryl Perkins, the cargo supervisor from earlier, was gone. When Evelyn had requested to pull him back in for secondary questioning, a junior officer had gone to retrieve him from the observation hold. The room was empty. His security badge had been left on the table, his radio off. No exit logs, no camera trace, as if he had vanished between the cracks. Sergeant Moore, reviewing the footage, frowned. Nothing past 10:42. He was still in the hallway then gone. Any visual confirmation? Evelyn asked, arms crossed. Nope. Cameras fuzzed between 10:43 and 10:47. That's a 4-minute blackout. Someone spoofed the network. Which means he had help, Evelyn muttered. A quiet hum of fear began to buzz beneath the surface of the operation. In the parking lot, Claire watched Mark climb into his government-issued SUV. Ranger leapt up into the back without hesitation. Claire leaned into the window. You think it's just cargo? What if it's not just hardware they're moving? Mark gave her a long look. Then we find out. Quietly. The SUV pulled out into traffic. Claire turned, notebook in hand. Somewhere, someone was watching this story too closely, and she had just stepped into the middle of it. Night settled over Denver International Airport like a thick quilt, soft on the surface but heavy with unspoken weight. Most of the terminals had quieted down, the buzz of day flights replaced with distant announcements and the occasional echo of rolling suitcases. But in a far-off service lot near the south end of the airport, a darker rhythm pulsed. Claire Bennett sat in a borrowed sedan with the engine off and the interior lights dimmed. Her coat still draped over the passenger seat was dusted with frost. She held her phone loosely in her lap, waiting. The coordinates she had followed had led her to a nondescript warehouse just outside the airport's jurisdiction. The building was long, flat-roofed, and lit only by a few flickering yellow lamps along its rear loading dock. No signage, no branding, but this was where her trail had pointed, and she wasn't alone. In the rearview mirror, headlights approached slowly, then flicked off. Mark Harris stepped out of the DHS vehicle, jacket zipped high, with Ranger moving beside him. Mark's posture was rigid, his expression sharper than earlier. Ranger, by contrast, seemed calm, sniffing the ground with professional purpose. Claire got out to meet them. You sure it's here? She asked quietly. Mark nodded. After Daryl vanished, Evelyn ran a trace on employee ID pings. We caught a dead signal that jumped from the secure zone to a private logistics center. Guess what company owns this land? Aon Corp, Claire said flatly. They filed it under a shell group, Civic Freight Solutions. Evelyn's pulling warrants, but I didn't feel like waiting. Claire glanced down at Ranger. Is he good with the cold? Mark gave a half smile. Better than me. Together, the trio moved quietly along the edge of the fence. Claire adjusted the strap on her shoulder bag and pulled out a handheld thermal imager. It wasn't standard issue. It was borrowed from a friend who owed her favors in places she never wrote about. Inside the warehouse, 3 figures moved slowly under low light. They wore utility jumpsuits and were pushing a new crate, same dimensions as the one from earlier, onto a reinforced dolly. Claire zoomed in with the lens. Another shipment. That crate's going out tonight? Mark's jaw tensed. It's not even logged. Ranger let out a low growl. Let's get closer, Mark whispered. They slipped through a loose section of chain link near the rear service entrance. Ranger led, nose twitching. Mark followed with silent steps, his Marine training taking over. Claire stayed back slightly, keeping her camera up. Suddenly, the rear warehouse door opened with a metallic creak. A man stepped out to smoke, early 30s, lean, with angular features and a buzz cut. He wore a dark gray jumpsuit with a clipped badge that read Travis. He lit his cigarette and leaned against the wall, exhaling in long streams. Ranger crouched automatically, ears pinned, eyes locked. Mark held his breath. Claire, carefully raising her phone, snapped several quick photos. Then Travis froze. Not because of Claire or Mark, but because his walkie hissed with static, and a single voice crackled through. Unit 5 inbound. Have crate marked for immediate redirection. Repeat. Divert from manifest. Proceed to Terminal 3 via B route access. Travis stiffened, dropped his cigarette, and re-entered the warehouse. Claire looked at Mark. They're moving it right now. We need to get that crate stopped before it hits the runway. Mark keyed his secured radio. Control, this is Unit 4. We have unmarked cargo scheduled for unauthorized route. Requesting intercept at South Terminal Access Point. Priority red. A beat of silence. Then Evelyn's voice came through, sharp and alert. Confirmed. I'm en route. Don't engage. Observe only. We'll reroute personnel to intercept. Too late, Claire said, pointing. Look. From the far side of the building, a white cargo van pulled away with the crate inside. It turned slowly, headed toward a side road leading back toward the main terminal grounds. I'm following it, Mark said, already moving. Stay back. I'll report if it diverts. No chance, Claire replied. This is what I came for. Mark didn't argue. In a quieter part of the airport, Captain Daniel Ross stood at a terminal security desk, speaking to a colleague from maintenance named Ezra Lynn. Ezra was a slender man in his 50s, with large wireframe glasses and an encyclopedic memory for flight patterns. He had worked airport maintenance for 2 decades, quietly logging every oddity he came across. You ever seen cargo like this routed through private carriers? Daniel asked, sliding a clipboard across the desk. Ezra adjusted his glasses. 3 times, maybe. Last 6 months. Always marked urgent health shipment, but I never saw anything medical come back the other way. Did you report it? Ezra shrugged. To who? They all had clearances. And honestly, when DHS dogs started sniffing around earlier today, I figured someone finally noticed. Daniel leaned in. If I gave you 3 tail numbers, could you run flight logs for load to unload times? I could, but if I do, I'm going to need a backup plan. Daniel nodded slowly. I'm working on it. Back near the South Service Road, the white van was stopped, surrounded. Marked DHS vehicles had blocked its path at the turn into Terminal 3. Evelyn Cross stood at the head of the convoy, flanked by 2 federal transport agents and a bomb squad tech. Travis, the driver, had his hands against the hood, detained. Mark arrived seconds later with Claire and Ranger in tow. Good timing, Evelyn said, eyeing the crate in the back. Same dimensions, same internal shielding. We're going to crack this one open, too. Claire raised her camera again. Mind if I... Evelyn sighed. You're already here. Mark opened the van's rear doors. Inside was the same silver casing. On the inner edge of the foam insert, partially covered by cling wrap, a small emblem glinted under the van light. Aeon Core. The federal substation just outside Denver International Airport wasn't marked on any public map. Nestled behind an abandoned freight yard and shielded by a faded chain-link fence, it looked like a decommissioned weather station from the outside, just a few squat buildings with boarded windows and rust-colored vents. But beneath the surface, it pulsed with encrypted Wi-Fi, biometric scanners, and corridors lit with flickering fluorescent lights. This was where truth was stored in silence. Inside the operations briefing room, the air felt denser than usual. Evelyn Cross stood at the head of a long, rectangular table, arms folded, her platinum gray ponytail pulled back tighter than usual. The room was dim, the blinds drawn. A digital projector glowed behind her, displaying a frozen image of the silver Aeon Core crate, its logo zoomed in and outlined in red. Seated on one side were 3 men in black suits, clean-shaven, generic haircuts, Department of Homeland Security badges clipped to their lapels. The man in the center, Agent Harold Leland, had deep-set eyes and pale skin, a voice like a rusted hinge. He rarely blinked and never smiled. He had been with the Federal Security Bureau, an internal division that handled high-clearance investigations, for over 2 decades. On the opposite side of the table sat Mark Harris in full uniform, back straight, hands clasped on the table, with Ranger lying obediently at his feet. The German Shepherd was freshly groomed, a metal-shaped pin clipped to the edge of his canine vest. But despite the small honor, Ranger seemed subdued, as if he sensed the tension around him. Mark felt it too. Claire Bennett sat further down the table, notably out of uniform and very much out of place. She wore a plain navy sweater over dark jeans, hair tied up in a loose bun. Her face held a carefully measured defiance. Though she'd been invited by Evelyn under protest from Agent Leland, her presence was begrudgingly allowed on the grounds of civilian involvement in origin discovery. In simpler terms, she had come too close to be left out. Evelyn began. 3 days ago, Flight 217 was grounded due to a canine alert. That alert led to the discovery of an unmanifested cargo crate embedded with a signal repeater, built using stealth tech traced back to Aeon Core technologies. She clicked the projector. A new image appeared, schematics of the device hidden inside the medical casing. Further investigation revealed this was not an isolated incident, she continued. A second crate was intercepted last night, en route to Terminal 3, contained similar payload, same casing, same routing methods. Agent Leland tapped his pen once. The operation seems well-funded and precisely timed. This isn't a rogue contractor move. This is embedded coordination inside freight management. Claire leaned forward. And yet no arrests, no names released, no media bulletins. Why? Leland turned his icy stare toward her. Because panic in the public sector benefits no one, especially when we're not yet certain how deep the infection goes. Mark shifted in his seat. So, we're just supposed to keep quiet while they continue operating? No, Evelyn cut in. That's why you're here. We're recommending internal commendation for Officer Harris and his canine. But, as of now, both are under a gag order. This investigation is being elevated to Tier 5 clearance. Claire scoffed. You want to bury it? Leland didn't flinch. We want to contain it. Mark clenched his jaw. With respect, sir, the dog did his job. He exposed something your systems didn't even detect. Which is exactly why this stays contained, Leland snapped. We can't have the public thinking their national security depends on instinct over infrastructure. Claire opened her laptop slowly, clearly preparing to speak again, but Evelyn raised a hand. Claire, I let you in this room because I trust your intentions, but I need you to understand something. If you leak any of this before we secure full access to Aeon Core's internal network, we may lose every chance to shut it down. Claire looked at Ranger, then at Mark. Her voice dropped. You know what happens if they beat you to the narrative. Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't need to. Just then, the door opened and Daniel Ross stepped inside. He still wore his pilot's badge, though his tie was loosened and his jacket missing. The lines in his face were more pronounced today, carved deeper by sleepless hours and mounting frustration. A seasoned presence, the kind that quietly commanded the room just by entering. Captain Ross, Leland said, mildly surprised. You were not summoned. I came anyway, Daniel replied calmly. Just filed formal refusal for reassignment. Declined the next 2 flights. That's why I'm here. Evelyn tilted her head. You're walking away? No, I'm standing up. He stepped forward, placing a printed flight log on the table. 3 other routes, same cargo profiles, same anomalies, same corporate shell identities, and the same last-minute clearance overrides. This isn't isolated. This is a system. Leland took the paper, scanned it. You realize what you're implying? I realize I've been flying blind while someone used my plane to ship military-grade surveillance equipment into civilian zones, Daniel said, his voice never rising. And I want that to stop. Claire's eyes locked with his, a flicker of gratitude passing silently between them. Ranger let out a quiet huff, as if approving. For a moment, the room stilled. Then Evelyn exhaled. We move tonight, quietly. We trace the point of origin. Claire, you stay close but off record. Mark, You're reassigned to internal intel escort with Ranger. Captain Ross, I'll need you to relay what you found directly to DHS cybersecurity.
Leland stood slowly, closed his tablet. But make no mistake, if this goes beyond us...
He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Spring rain fell lightly over Washington, D.C., painting the marble stairs of federal buildings in a muted silver sheen. Patches of green pushed stubbornly through the concrete edges of the National Mall, and the air carried the scent of thawing earth and magnolia blossoms. Inside a wood-paneled press room at the Department of Justice, the air was thick not with rain, but with revelation. Claire Bennett stood at the podium, flashes from cameras bouncing off her notes and dark blazer. She had tied her auburn hair into a tight knot, her usually sharp features softened by the weight of exhaustion and something more, quiet satisfaction. Behind her, on a large screen, glowed the headline of the week's most explosive expose: A Cargo of Silence, How Aeon Corps Smuggled Surveillance Tech into America's Skies. She didn't need to speak yet. Her article had already spread like wildfire across the country, syndicated in 3 national papers, featured on primetime, and cited by 2 congressional committees. But this moment was for the people who stood with her. In the second row sat Mark Harris, dressed in formal DHS blues, chest adorned with the silver Canine Valor Cross pinned just below the collarbone. Beside him, Ranger sat tall and calm, wearing his own braided ribbon around his neck, a custom medal, glinting faintly under the lights. The shepherd's eyes moved constantly, scanning the crowd, steady and composed as ever. To Ranger, this wasn't ceremony. It was just another room to watch, another scent to catalog, another mission to stay ready for. Mark had cleaned up for the day, shaving closer than usual. The lines around his eyes deeper but softer. Since the operation's conclusion, he had spoken only once to the media, brief, polite, then disappeared again. He didn't need attention. His partner had already said everything with a look and a stance. Claire finished her brief statement, answered a few restrained questions, then stepped down from the stage and crossed the room to Mark and Ranger. "That's it," she said quietly. "The story's out. The damage is real." Mark gave a tired nod. "And now what?" Claire smiled faintly. "Now we watch what they try to hide next." Ranger wagged his tail once, as if in agreement. Behind the cameras, Daniel Ross leaned against the wall, arms folded, his pilot's badge now permanently retired. His salt and pepper hair had grown slightly longer since stepping away from flight duty, and the stiffness in his shoulders had been replaced with something more grounded. Civilian life hadn't softened him, it had focused him. "Tell me again how a dog saved federal infrastructure," he said dryly as Claire approached. "With better instincts than most human systems," she replied, bumping his arm lightly. They didn't say much after that. They didn't need to. Some friendships are built not on time, but on shared fire. 2 weeks earlier, the operation to take down Aeon Corps had unfolded quietly but swiftly. Using flight logs provided by Daniel and evidence uncovered by Claire, DHS coordinated with federal cybersecurity agents to raid 4 distribution hubs across the country. All of them were disguised under shell companies, names like Civic Freight Solutions, Nova Courier, and Metropulse Medical Transport. Inside the crates, the story repeated itself. Medical casings filled with signal relays, passive scanners, and acoustic surveillance tech built to bypass traditional airport detection. Most shocking was that none of it had been declared. The tech was never tested or regulated. It wasn't just a smuggling operation, it was infrastructure sabotage. In the wrong hands, it could have been weaponized for political blackmail, insider trading, or worse. The CEO of Aeon Corps, Vincent Lorman, a polished man in his late 50s, known for his golf charity galas and government contracts, was brought in for questioning. He smiled through the press. But by the time the investigation revealed internal memos discussing covert signal ecosystems, the smiling stopped. The raids made headlines, but it was Ranger who made hearts turn. Photos of the shepherd standing beside the crates, wearing his ribboned vest, had gone viral. Children sent drawings, veterans sent letters. Claire's article wasn't just an expose, it was a testament to loyalty, to intuition, and to the unseen guardians walking on 4 legs. 3 months later, Mark Harris sat at a canine training facility in upstate New York. A wide field of grass stretched behind him, dotted with agility equipment, obstacle walls, and scent boxes. Ranger, now semi-retired, lay comfortably beneath a shaded bench, eyes watching younger trainees scramble through their exercises. The offer had come from the National K-9 Tactical Program Director, a woman named Captain Eloise Stanton, mid-40s, tall, with sharp gray eyes and a voice trained by years of drill instruction. She had read the dossier, watched the footage, and offered Mark a new path. Become a national instructor. Train the next generation of working dogs and handlers, not for war, but for vigilance. Mark hadn't hesitated long. He had said yes the same day. His headaches had eased, not entirely, but enough. Enough to believe in purpose again. Eloise walked across the field, clipboard in hand. "How's the hero doing?" she asked, glancing down at Ranger. "Pretending he's just a dog," Mark said. She smirked. "Ain't that the truth?" They watched a young Belgian Malinois bolt across the field toward a scent station, skidding slightly as he overran it. Ranger chuffed quietly. "Show off," Mark muttered. Back in D.C., Claire stood outside the Library of Congress, holding a signed first edition copy of her new book, Eyes in the Sky, The Quiet War Behind Our Airports. A woman in her early 60s with soft gray curls and thin gold-framed glasses approached shyly. "I read it twice," the woman whispered. "I used to work in flight records for DHS. I always knew something felt wrong." Claire took her hand. "Now you know you weren't alone." She watched the woman disappear into the crowd of readers and turned her gaze upward toward the flag fluttering in the warm spring wind. So much had changed.
But Ranger was still watching, still listening.
Still waiting for the next sound no one else could hear. Sometimes, the smallest voice speaks the loudest. Sometimes, it takes a loyal dog to reveal what all the machines and men have missed. Ranger didn't speak a single word, but through his instincts, his faithfulness, and his silent courage, he uncovered a truth that would have remained buried in shadows. We live in a world full of noise, full of distractions and fear, but miracles still happen, in quiet corners, in moments of doubt, through the ones we least expect. Ranger was more than a dog. He was a guardian, a vessel of divine purpose. And perhaps, just perhaps, God chose him to be the voice that stopped what evil tried to move in silence. Let this story remind us, God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes he sends his angels in fur and 4 legs. If you believe that every soul, human or animal, has a purpose, if you believe that no act of loyalty is ever wasted, if you believe that God still places protectors among us, then share this story. Leave a comment below. Say amen if you believe that miracles still happen when we open our eyes and hearts. And may God bless each of you watching right now, your homes, your loved ones, and the loyal companions walking beside you. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of faith, courage, and the unseen hand that guides us.